The Old Testament provides several reasons why God's people, including righteous believers, go through suffering and pain. Here are some key biblical explanations. 1. A test of faith. Job 1 through 2, Deuteronomy 8, 2 through 3. Job was a righteous man, yet he suffered intense loss, proving that suffering is not always due to sin, but can be a test of faith. Verse: The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job 1:21. Lesson: God allows trials to test and refine faith. 2. To teach dependence on God. Exodus 14, Deuteronomy 8:3. The Israelites suffered in Egypt and later in the wilderness. God allowed this to teach them to trust Him. Verse: He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Deuteronomy 8:3. Lesson: Suffering reminds believers to rely on God rather than themselves. 3. A result of a fallen world. Genesis 3:16-19, Ecclesiastes 2:23. Sin brought pain, suffering, and death into the world, affecting everyone. Verse: Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. Genesis 3:17. Lesson: Pain and suffering exist because the world is broken by sin. 4. God's discipline and correction. Psalm 119:71, Proverbs 3:11-12. Suffering can be a form of God's loving correction to bring His people back to righteousness. Verse: It was good for me to be afflicted so that I might learn your decrees. Psalm 119, verse 71. Lesson: Sometimes pain is God's way of redirecting His people toward His will. 5. To build character and endurance. Isaiah 48:10, Lamentations 3:31-33. Trials refine believers like gold in a furnace. Key verse: See, I have refined you, though not as silver. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction. Isaiah 48:10. Lesson: Suffering strengthens character and faith. 6. Suffering for righteousness' sake. Psalm 34:19, Daniel 3:16-18. Many Old Testament figures like Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys suffered for their faith but remained faithful. Verse: The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. Psalm 34, verse 19. Lesson: Suffering can come because of standing for God's truth. 7. God's greater purpose. Joseph's story, Genesis 50:20. Joseph suffered betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, but God used it for a greater good. Verse: You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50:20. Lesson: Even painful experiences can be used for God's greater purpose. 8. The mystery of God's will. Ecclesiastes 3:1, Isaiah 55:8-9. Some suffering is beyond human understanding, and only God knows the full reason behind it. Verse: For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. Isaiah 55:8. Lesson: Trusting God, even when we don't understand, is key. Suffering is part of life in a fallen world, but the Old Testament teaches that God is always in control. He allows pain for growth, discipline, faith building, and fulfilling His plans. However, He also promises to comfort, deliver, and ultimately restore His people. Psalm 30, verse 5, Isaiah 41, verse 10. Job is the biggest example in Bible for this context. A test of faith. Job 1 through 2, Deuteronomy 8, 2 through 3. Job was a righteous man, yet God allowed him to suffer as a test of his faith. Verses: The Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Job 1:8. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Job 2:10. Suffering is sometimes a test to strengthen our faith and prove our trust in God. Job trusted God even when he didn't understand his suffering. The Israelites also suffered in the wilderness to learn reliance on God.